So over the course of today's summit sessions, we will have the chance to hear from experienced leaders, from cutting-edge researchers, and from people who develop really useful tools. Our first session is from Susan Wallace at Statistics Canada, who will bring us some preliminary analysis from the 2022 Canadian Survey on Disability. Susan, who uses she, her pronouns, is Section Chief, Disability and Accessibility Statistics, and the manager responsible for the Canadian Survey on Disability, as well as other projects related to disability and accessibility statistics. Susan has been with the Disability and Accessibility Statistics section since 2020 and at Statistics Canada since 2006. I am going to hand it over to Susan now. Thank you so much for being here with us. Please feel free to share your slides.
Good afternoon. So today I will be presenting information from the Canadian Survey on Disability, including an overview of the survey. I will be presenting in English, but the slides are available in French as well if you need those. And with no further ado, let's flip to the next slide. So just the presentation will be kind of what I just said, actually, an overview of the CSD, what we're going to look at for key findings, and then information on what we're looking at releasing in the near future. So a bit of background on the way Statistics Canada measures disability. There's been change over time. When Statistics Canada initially began collecting information, it was very much focused on the medical model of disability. However, we've now moved towards questions that embody the social model of disability. As you may be aware, the social model of disability sees disability not as something inherent to a person, but a result of functional limitations in combination with an unsupportive or unaccommodating environment. And similarly, the names and the history of the surveys that we have collected disability information on have changed over time. We began with the Canada Health and Disability Survey, which was part of the Labour Force Survey, and now we collect information using the Canadian Survey on Disability. The name has been the same for the past 3 cycles now, although the past 2 cycles are comparable. I'll get more into those details later on about comparability between the survey cycles, but just so you know, past 3 have the same name. And so background on the survey itself, the population covered by the CSD is persons aged 15 years of age and over as of May 11th, 2021, which is the census day. Persons living in private households only in all provinces and territories. And it is those people who reported an activity limitation because of a long-term condition or difficulty as part of the activities of daily living question on the census. The CSD itself was conducted between June and November of 2022 using an electronic questionnaire. There was both the electronic questionnaire and computer-assisted telephone interviewing to support non-response follow-up, but also to ensure accessibility. And the CSD sample is selected specifically to produce information for detailed age groups within all provinces, and then for the territories, persons aged 15 years of age and over. And then following the data collection, the CSD was linked to the 2021 census, which gives us additional information on persons with disabilities, but also gives us information for persons without disabilities. So the CSD, it identifies persons with disabilities through the disability screening questions, which produce information for 10 separate disability types. There's also a severity score that is produced for every individual disability type, as well as a global severity score that produces information for all survey respondents. a bit more information on the global severity score. It's a very important tool that we use in our analysis. It is important, though, to mention that it is not used as a label or a judgment. It is just a statistical tool. 4 different severity classes are produced for this tool: mild, moderate, severe, and very severe. And then often for our analysis, we group together mild and moderate into milder, and severe and very severe into more severe. And the severity score relies on the frequency and the severity of limitations and the number of disabilities a person has in total. So content on the CSD, it includes information related to aids and assistive devices and technology, help received, healthcare, therapies and services, educational experiences, including education accommodations for those who were recently in school, labor force information, including required and unmet workplace accommodations, internet use barriers to accessibility, which was new for 2022, information on persons who are housebound, and food security. In addition, there are questions on the that allow us to produce information for episodic disabilities, whether or not a disability or a condition. It's important to note, in the CSD, we never tell anyone that they have a disability. We don't use the word disability because identifying as a person with a disability is a different concept than how we measure disability. And so therefore, we ask things: is your condition continuous? Do you have periods where you have more or less periods of limitation, and things like that? As I mentioned, I'll speak a bit about the comparability between the 2022 CSD and the 2017 cycle. So the tool that was used to measure disability, the disability screening questions, are the same, and the survey methodology is the same between the 2 survey cycles. So therefore, this is how we're able to produce information on change over time for the population of persons with disabilities. And we're able to compare much of the content between the 2 surveys, although there have been some changes. So if you are wanting to do historical comparability or request data that allows you to do historical comparability, you need to ensure that the concepts that you are trying to compare align between the 2 survey cycles. Moving on to key findings. So we found in 2022, 27% of Canadians aged 15 years of age and over, or this is 8 million people, have one or more disabilities that limit them in their daily activities. And this disability rate increased by 5 percentage points since 2017. We also found that the rate of disability increased between 2017
Hi,
and
Susan.
2020.
This is Tammy. Can you speak just a little slower for all of the interpreters? Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks. Sorry, I was trying to pause, but I don't think I was pausing quite long enough. Okay, I'll start the slide again, and I will go slower. The rate of disability increased between 2017 and 2022 in all provinces and most territories. The exception to increase is in Nunavut, where the change that you see on the slide, the 1.1%, was not statistically significant. In 2022, the rate of disability was higher among women than men. Women were also more likely than men to have a more severe disability than men. I will note that the 2022 CSD included questions on both sex at birth and gender, while the 2017 CSD asked respondents if they were male or female. So in order to facilitate comparison between the 2 survey cycles and to protect confidentiality of non-binary persons, the 2022 survey uses the category of men, but this includes cisgender and transgender men, as well as some non-binary persons, and women includes cisgender and transgender women, as well as some non-binary persons. It is possible to get information on persons who have a gender other than man or woman. However, that access is very closely controlled so that we can ensure confidentiality and protect persons who might be vulnerable. So this is probably the slide that everyone is the most looking forward to. And this is actually the first time that we've presented this information because we have not yet had a chance to replicate analysis that happened previously. So of all persons with disabilities, 35% experienced continuous limitation, whereas 65% experienced some sort of disability dynamic. In 2022, of those experiencing disability dynamics, 30% experienced limitations that worsened over time, so progressive limitations. 45% sometimes had periods of a month or more without experiencing limitations, so that's a recurrent disability. And then 24.5%, I don't know if that rounds up or down.
I'm sorry, this is the interpreter speaking. I'm just going to have to ask you to slow down, please, especially with the numbers. Yeah, sorry. I just can't keep up.
Sorry. Is there a point you want me to take it back to?
Yeah, if you could go back to in 2022, the 30%.
Okay.
Thank you.
So in 2022, of those experiencing disability dynamics, 30% experienced limitations that worsened over time. 45% sometimes had periods of a month or more without experiencing limitations. And 24.5% had shorter periods in which they experienced fluctuations and limitations. So, sorry, I was going to speak about there's a chart on the slide as well, and that gives the change over time. I unfortunately don't have the numbers in front of me, but you can see that there was an increase in the proportion of persons who had recurrent limitations and fluctuating limitations compared to 2017. So overall, close to 60% of persons with disabilities had milder disabilities and 41% had more severe disabilities. We saw a slight increase in the persons with milder disabilities between the two surveys and a slight decrease in persons with a more severe disability at the same time. Moving on, youth experienced the largest increase in disability from 2017 to 2022. So while seniors experienced the highest disability rate among Canadians at 40%, the increase in the disability rate among youth was the largest increase at 7 percentage points between the 2 years. In addition, the type of disability varies by age group. The most common disability per age group among seniors was pain-related, which was the same as for the working age population or persons aged 25 to 64 years of age. Whereas among youth with disabilities, mental health related and learning disabilities were the most common disability types. And focusing more on the disability types themselves, mental health related disabilities had the largest increase between 2017 and 2022. While pain-related disabilities were the most common disability type, as 62% of persons with disabilities reported a pain-related disability, mental health-related disabilities had the largest increase, with an increase of 6 percentage points. I will note that this slide has the proportion of persons, the disability rate among persons with disabilities. We do have information on the disability rate among the total population available in other products as well. Getting a bit more into the nuanced information about disability, the proportion of persons with disabilities experiencing co-occurring disability types was similar to 2017. So while 30% of Canadians with this disability had one disability type, that means that 70% of persons with disabilities had two or more. Additionally, as individuals age, they're more likely to experience a higher number of co-occurring disabilities. Moving on to look at employment, the 2022 CSD found that persons with disabilities were more likely to be employed than in the past. Before delving too far into findings, I will note that information comparing persons with and without disabilities comes from information from the census, which means it reflects employment during the spring of 2021. We saw that the employment rate for persons with disabilities between 25 and 64 years of age increased by 6 percentage points between those two survey years, which decreased the gap in employment between persons with and without disabilities. We're still working on untangling whether this narrowing of the gap is the result of more more persons with disabilities entering the labor market, or if there is an increased prevalence of disability among persons who are already employed. Persons with disabilities are at a financial disadvantage compared to persons without disabilities. According to the 2022 CSD, the median personal after-tax income of persons with disabilities was close to $33,000 compared to just over $39,000 for persons without disabilities. This is an instance where analysis by severity again illuminates differences among persons with disabilities, as persons with more severe disabilities had a lower personal median income than persons with milder disabilities. And I will note that because of the way income information is collected, this actually reflects income in 2020 because it's the income information for the year prior to the census. However, we are integrating information from tax data and will have 2022 income information in a little bit. Not quite there yet. I mentioned that there was new information collected on barriers to accessibility in 2022, so we're able to begin to produce information on the proportion of persons with disabilities who experience barriers to accessibility. Overall, nearly 3/4 of persons with disabilities reported that they experience one or more of the 27 different types of barriers to accessibility that were included in the survey. And we specifically ask people if they experience barriers because of their condition, not in general, because accessibility is a concern for all, but particularly persons with disabilities. And the most commonly, I get so carried away. I just love talking about data. The most commonly experienced barriers to accessibility were barriers related to features inside or outside public spaces, so the built environment, followed by barriers to communication, which could be somebody talking too fast during a presentation. Was barriers related to behaviors, misconceptions or assumptions, and then finally barriers related to online activities. So a bit about what we're planning in the future. So we will be releasing a demographic, employment, and income profile of Canadians with disabilities in May. We are currently aiming for the 22nd of May. If not that day, then it will be the following week. I'm still hopeful for the 22nd though. Next week, we will be releasing, I believe, 23 data tables focused on demographic, employment, and accessibility related information. These include tables which support the performance indicator framework.
So she just dumped it.
For those who are not aware, the performance indicator framework is how our colleagues at Employment and Social Development Canada are working on measuring accessibility in Canada as part of measuring progress towards creating a barrier-free Canada by 2040 as required by the Accessible Canada Act. We're also undertaking further analysis of barriers to accessibility, and planning for other products is still underway. So if there are specific data needs, we're open to suggestions so long as we can secure funding to undertake this analysis. So this slide has some links to useful information. So how to get more information on the Canadian Survey on Disability. The first is more of a quick overview, whereas the second is an in-depth analysis. Or not an analysis, but an in-depth look at the survey. And then the next couple of links are products that we released on December 1st as part of the initial release of the Canadian Survey on Disability. Okay, thank you. This slide has a few additional email addresses so that you can know where to go if you need more information or if you would like to request custom data.
Thank you so much, Susan. So much information. We always find this when we invite folks from Statistics Canada to come and share information. But it is also incredibly valuable to us to have this kind of information. So thank you for the work that you've done to prepare the presentation and for being here to answer some of the questions that have come up. There are so many. Right now, there are 45 open. So I don't think we're going to be able to get to all of them. But over the next 5 minutes, George will lead us through a few.
So the first question was, they were wondering why the CSD data collection was only for those in private dwellings.
So that's an interesting question, because I do recognize that information on persons in non-private dwellings is a data gap. However, we rely on the questions asked on the census to identify persons likely to have a disability. And it would be very difficult to collect information from all of the different types of collective dwellings. So thinking of small group homes, it may be possible to get information on the persons living there. But when you think about, 100-person or prisons that, may have, I don't know how many people live in a prison. When you think of the large scale building and collective dwellings, it would be difficult, if not impossible, for an administrator to tell us whether or not somebody reliably tell us if someone has these kind of difficulties in their daily activities, because we're asking about a person's experiences and not about their diagnosis with a medical condition. So there would be no, we can't rely on administrative records that say, oh, this person has this chronic condition, they take this medication. We would not be able to adhere to the social model in understanding in measuring disability in the same way. However, I do completely realize it is a data gap. It's just a matter of how do we address it in a way that is compatible with how we measure disability according to the social model, and also funding.
So another question was, how could people take the survey, or I guess how can they do it in the future if there's a future survey?
So the survey selection is based on, first you have to receive the long form census. And if you receive the long form census and you have, you provide affirmative responses to the activities of daily living question, you may be randomly selected. So the way we collect information ensures that it is representative of the larger population and not just an individual. So the sample selection is very mathematical and random so that it is representative. So you can't volunteer for the survey.
So it comes to the next question is, what was the sample size of the survey?
So the initial sample size of the CSD was 54,000 individuals, which is a very large household survey. Our ultimate response rate was 61.1%. And we see in the census that there's a large number of what we call false positives. So people will read the question, do you have difficulty seeing even when wearing glasses? People will read, do you have difficulty seeing, and say, oh yeah, I do. And then when they get screened into the CSD and they get asked a series of questions about, can you see even when wearing glasses? They go, oh, wait, yeah, I wear glasses. I can see just fine. So they become out of scope for the survey. So ultimately, our sample size that we have for analysis is around 23,000 individuals.
So is it okay if we share, people asking, is it okay if we share the slides with them? The quotes?
Yep. Yep.
Okay, so that's one of the questions. Did the definition for disabilities update or change to reflect the jump in the numbers?
Nope, there was no change to the collection methodology or the tool used to measure disability. We are still understanding why this change, the growth or increase has happened, but our initial analysis tells us that it is in part because of Canada's aging population. As people age, they are more likely to have a disability, but also we're seeing changes in the youth population, an increase in mental health related disabilities, an increase in learning disabilities. So those are the two main drivers as far as we can see for the increase in in disabilities overall.
What is the labor market availability or labor pool availability for people with disabilities in Canada, i.e., sorry, how many questions are coming in? Lost the question. Here we go.
Or labor pool availability for persons with disabilities in Canada. So either aged 15 to 64 or 25 to 64. The commenter recalls that it used to be around 9 or 9.5%. They were wondering what the most up-to-date number is.
Yeah, so I don't have that number off the top of my head. I'm sorry. I know that the profile for persons with disabilities will have information on work potential, which, if you're familiar with the previous profile, is the number of persons who are not employed but who could be, who are looking for work and could be employed in an inclusive labor market. But yeah, I don't have information on workforce availability in that specific percentage at my fingertips. I'm sorry.
Whatever.
And is the data also broken down by race, Indigenous identification?
We do have information on Indigenous identity as well as racialized identity. I will note that the Indigenous People Survey is the source of information for the disability rate among First Nations people living off reserve, Métis and Inuit. But we do collect that information to provide information on the characteristics of persons with disabilities, Indigenous persons with disabilities. I don't have that off the top of my head as well. I obviously couldn't give you the percentage of First Nations, Métis and Inuit. I'm trying to talk too fast. I'll slow down for the interpreter and for myself. I can't give you the percentage of First Nations people, Métis and Inuit with disabilities, because that comes from a different survey, but further analysis will include information on racialized Canadians with a disability.
Okay, and what is the factors of why the rate for disability was higher among women than men in 2022?
So part of that is that women live longer, therefore there's more of them and they have more disabilities as they age. And otherwise there is slight differences in prevalence of various disability types. So therefore that leads to being higher among women. I cannot remember what types off the top of my head, so I don't want to guess and give misleading information, but that profile that is coming out shortly does present a lot of information by gender, so that should help with that understanding.
And another question is, how can this data help the HR professional create their organizational strategies with regards to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging workplace environments? Will these be law and regulations from the government or an initiative of the organizations?
So I am not able to speak to policies and programming. I'm very much just a data person, and our role is to collect this information and make it available for policy analysts, for program designers, for persons in non-federal organizations, so that they can make use of this information to design programs and policies that support persons with disabilities.
Scrolling through all the
Find a good one.
Will there be a breakdown of data or race, disability, and access to social determinants of health? This was a huge gap in the previous CSD, as it reinforces a monolith view of disability, where someone's disability experience is intersectional, which informs how they navigate supports and barriers that might show up due to racism and ableism, for example?
That's a great question, and we are looking for ways to ensure that we approach our analysis with an intersectional lens. We do have some challenges in terms of sample size and ensuring that we have adequate numbers of persons of the various racialized categories so that we can do a meaningful analysis. But we don't currently have plans for that specific type of analysis, like looking at those sorts of intersectionalities and disability among, like going into the depths of detail for racialized persons with disabilities. But that's a great suggestion, and I will, talk to our partners and about that possibility.
Okay, and how can we access the data for transgender and non-binary people? Is that available?
So, couple of things on that. That data file is, you can request custom data tables that have that information for the 2S LGBTQ plus population. That's one way. Another way is to go into the research data centers when the data is available, which should be in the next week or two. And if you're able to access a research data center, and you can request access provided you have a rationale for doing so, you can access the data file and do analysis yourself. I will also highlight that someone on my team recently completed a draft of a fact sheet looking at 2S LGBTQ persons with disabilities, and we're hoping to release that in June.
Okay, and the last one is there one online source for all the data, programs, policies, plans, legislation, etc. related to the Canadian government? It seems there's tons going on, and there's some duplications and gaps.
So again, that's beyond my sphere of influence. Unfortunately, they don't let me make all of the decisions, but I can point you towards our data hub. So we have an accessibility data hub. It has all of Statistics Canada's information for our data on persons with disabilities, as well as links to various legislations, requirements, policies, a few key external data sources. It's so our accessibility data hub is just being updated, and a new iteration will be launched within the next about week and a half. But I will drop the link in the chat just as soon as I'm done talking.
Okay. Just got two more that came in. So what's the
George,
ratio?
unfortunately, we don't have time for any more questions. With over 40 happening in the last kind of 5 to 10 minutes, we're just going to have to cut them off there, I'm afraid. We do need to give our interpreters a break. So I hope that everyone has a chance to move around, to stretch, get something to drink, maybe have a snack. We will put a 10-minute timer up on the screen. But for now, I'd like to thank Susan and to thank everyone for all of their questions and engagement with this session. We will be back in 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you.